So since this is my first time up at the podium, I want to, for myself, welcome everyone here to the conference this year. Really appreciate the fantastic turnout. As you can tell, we're just a little bit ahead of schedule, but we're going to be bringing up our next panel that has to do with hydrogen. And I think that much as was referenced in just the prior panel, and frankly, in a lot of discussions, both we had some pre-conference events yesterday and thus far this morning. Hydrogen is one of the things that is what I see as that next thing on the hill. I've been involved with this program, and by the way, I should have said, my name is David Brocht, and I'm with Q-Tech Rock Law Firm. And the folks that are coming up, they should just come up and get ready to, so Heidi, where's Heidi at? At any rate, maybe we'll have one of the folks look for our next panel of speakers. My name is David Brocht. I'm with Q-Tech Rock Law Firm. Have been active in the renewable energy business, really starting here in Nebraska since in the ethanol industry. In fact, I started out as an ag banker. But where I think hydrogen really fits in, I grew up, in fact, on a dairy farm. And dairy animals produce a lot of milk, and then they produce a lot of some other things, all of which includes methane, and there's hydrogen in that. Nebraska has been in the energy business, and we are an energy state. And when I was energy director, if any of you heard kind of my stock presentation, that was something that you heard. I think the tie in Nebraska that combines our renewable energy and the things that we can use hydrogen for, the green fertilizer that was mentioned, is really a unique and an exciting possibility. So with that, I'm going to just do the initial intro here and then hand it off to Heidi. We have to prepare for our IRA Production of Hydrogen set. So Heidi, I'll hand it off.
Thank you all so much for being here today and for the planning committee that coordinates this great event. It's been sold out. Also, everyone else that makes this event run smoothly. So I just wanted to note that we will be leaving time at the end of this session. So if you have for questions, so if you have a question, please stand up or raise your hand so the microphone can come to you. So I'm Heidi Aschbacher. I'm a manager in origination covering SPP and ERCOT at Invenergy. I am not the owner of Invenergy, as it says in the program. If I did, I'd probably have a ski in, ski out house in Colorado by now. And then next to me is Grace McNamara. Yep. Director of Hydrogen Business Development at NextEra Energy, and Josh Westling. He's the owner of JWC Gburg LLC, and you might know his company from the Meadowlark project that he will be talking about. So today we are going to be talking about a technology that isn't new, but it's getting a lot of hype recently, and that's hydrogen, or the Swiss Army knife of energy, as you might have seen it referenced in articles. So I have an audience question for you, which raise your hand if you work on hydrogen directly or indirectly as part of your day job. Okay, so I figured it'd be very few hands, just like Dave spoke earlier. You know, this is a wind and solar conference, and joked like next year it could be wind, solar, storage, and hydrogen. So I think over the next few years, if I ask that question again, I think there would be way more hands raised. So let's break it down to the basics. What is hydrogen, and how and why is it useful? And what are we using hydrogen for?
Hydrogen is the lightest element in the world. And right now we're using hydrogen produced mainly by SMR in a lot of different applications for cracking petroleum into its various products, as a building block for chemicals, and probably most importantly for Nebraska, as a building block for fertilizer. And it's useful because really it is and can be a building block for a number of things. And with the advent of the IIJA and the IRA, the world that hydrogen can be useful for has expanded quite dramatically. Not potentially in the next couple of years, but certainly as we all build out electrification and commit to those net zero or real zero targets, hydrogen is going to be an important building block to get to those commitments.
So yeah, as she mentioned, there's a variety of applications for hydrogen today. I think the most pragmatic, and certainly the way we're looking at it is as fertilizer, but it's used in the refining process. I think ultimately folks want to try to incentivize it to get into transportation, get into other energy usages. But as I view the world for the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be in a handful of applications as you look to lower the cost of production, specifically through electrolysis.
Okay. So hydrogen is all of the hype these days. So what do you think has caused this hype? Is it decarbonization, IRA, announcements of the hydrogen hub, all of the above?
From my standpoint, it's the ever eternal push for decarbonization. Again, very energy dense molecule. So the theory that you can use it in transportation or use it for energy purposes, I think is a great one. But being able to do it in a way that's carbon free, if that's their intention, I think is still a work in progress. And being able to scale to get it to that point is going to be important.
Yeah, and I think for hydrogen, scale is sort of the beginning and the end of the conversation, right? Because what you're really targeting is an economic substitution for energy that is carbon intensive. And so the hype, I think, is caused by all of the above. I think anytime you get federal funding into the mix, everyone gets a little bit excited. And so the advent of the PTC really brought about a lot of interest in decarbonizing hydrogen as part of the existing uses and then finding new uses for it. The hydrogen hubs, certainly with the recent announcement of the 7 hubs that are going to be getting that funding, certainly has expanded the potential uses and the locations for those potential uses. And so the hype has spread.
So hydrogen is classified into different colors such as gray, blue, and green. Can you talk a little bit more about what those colors means and which your company is most focused on in the next few years?
So gray hydrogen is about 98% of the hydrogen being used in the US today that is produced by SMR. It's just taking natural gas and breaking it down to carbon and hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is taking that gray hydrogen and then either sequestering or using the carbon that is produced during that SMR process. Green hydrogen is using renewable energy to run an electrolyzer to produce hydrogen, and that just takes the inputs of renewable energy and water and breaks that water down into hydrogen and oxygen and vents the oxygen while storing or using the hydrogen. There are a couple of other colors like pink, which uses nuclear to run an electrolyzer, and turquoise and gold, and I'll let you guys look that up after the panel. And NextEra has a history, obviously, of being the largest renewable energy developer in the US. And so we're most focused, and I would say actually solely focused, on green hydrogen so that we can expand our capabilities from developing wind, solar, and storage to utilizing that to run an electrolyzer and produce that green hydrogen.
Yeah, as a side note, because I'm in a room full of power people, I might mention that in our case, SMR stands for steam methane reforming.
Yes.
I learned that it was also small modular reactors from some folks. So lest there be any confusion there, Phil figured I'd share that. Having done some projects that are SMR based, and now looking at this project that is electrolysis, I just think it's a elegant and more predictable way of making hydrogen.
And actually, another note, electrolysis, the technology to produce hydrogen, has been around for over 100 years. It's not a new technology, and which gives anybody financing one of these projects a lot of comfort. But coupling it with renewable energy is a new step in using electrolysis to produce hydrogen. So I think that's what is sort of elegant about it now.
Yeah, specifically for the purposes of making fertilizer. It's been used to make fertilizer since before natural gas was.
Okay, thank you. So Invenergy is the largest privately held renewable development company that first started with natural gas projects. So it has been a natural move for us to get into hydrogen, especially as we've discussed, renewable projects and green hydrogen are going hand in hand, as you discussed, with the different colors. So Invenergy's pilot project, Sauk Valley and Rock Falls, which will be operational early 2024, is our first green hydrogen project. So that will be powered by a co-located solar project. We started with a pilot project before we scale up so we can learn the intricacies of construction and operations of this project, just as something we've done in the past with new technologies such as solar and storage. So it would be great to hear what your companies are doing with hydrogen.
Yeah, so we're I don't know if everyone's heard of Metal Arc or no one's heard of Metal Arc, but we're going to make approximately 350,000 tons a year of urea ammonium nitrate near Gothenburg, Nebraska. That requires about 90 tons of H2 a day, which is a little more than 200 megawatts of requirement for power to produce. That we hope to have a single customer who will then proliferate that fertilizer to the region of farmers who depend on it to run their operations on a daily basis.
So NextEra has a couple of projects that we've announced in the hydrogen space. The first is our Cavendish Energy project. That's 25 megawatts worth of electrolyzers that is coupled with solar to produce hydrogen that's going to be blended into one of the turbines at our Okeechobee Clean Energy facility. That's actually in testing right now, and it's going to COD shortly, which will make it the second green hydrogen project online in the US. We've also announced a partnership with CF Industries to produce green hydrogen to feed into their existing ammonia loop at their Verdigris, Oklahoma plant, as well as a partnership with Linde to produce 120 tons per day of liquid hydrogen in Arizona, and that's going to target the California mobility market. So we're looking at hydrogen and their downstream products and uses across the country and to see where it would be most beneficial.
It would be great to hear your perspective on how you see hydrogen and renewable generation working together and what you're finding to be the obstacles and opportunities of developing both.
So the thing about hydrogen that I think is really exciting is it takes electrons and turns them into molecules. And anyone who's worked in power knows that electrons can't be stored very easily. You have to make them and do something with them almost instantaneously, unless you've got batteries in place. But with turning those electrons through an electrolyzer into hydrogen molecules, you now can produce all sorts of different fuels, from ammonia for fertilizer to e-jet fuel, even e-methane, e-diesel, e-methanol, all of these electrofuels that have existing markets or can be used in place of carbon-intensive fuels. It also, to couple hydrogen electrolysis with renewable energy, it allows you to place projects in more constrained areas of the grid without adding to the constraints of the grid as much as you would see with a standard renewable energy project where you're looking to take those electrons and deliver them to load. So I think there can be a lot of solutions that are available by coupling the generation and load together that you get with renewable energy and electrolyzer for hydrogen.
Don't have anything to add to that.
Okay, thank you. So just this past week, the government announced the 7 hydrogen hubs that will get the $7 billion in funding. Invenergy is a leading member of the Mach H2 Midwest Hub that got selected, but these hubs are located all around the US. So when companies are looking to build a hydrogen project, what qualities do you look for when siting?
Yeah, for us, power, since we're such a consumer, access to power, availability of power, specifically carbon-free renewable power, are very important to us. And then the electrolysis process also requires water. And then transportation infrastructure, so that way you have a methodology for delivering the product out into the world. And then willing community or supporting organization to help the project come to fruition.
And the only thing I would add would be customers. We're still very much in a chicken or an egg situation when it comes to producing hydrogen, where the customers may not be willing to move first and the producers may not be willing to move before the customers arrive. And so in order to really get a project off the ground, you need to have someone who wants what you're going to produce. In this case, for Josh, got a market for fertilizer. And so when we look for siting hydrogen projects, there needs to be a market for that hydrogen or the derivative product to go to.
So in my experience with developing wind and solar projects, there's no perfect project. So what challenges are you seeing while you're trying to develop? And I know you kind of touched on that briefly, but if there's anything more.
I think a lot of it is education also. Hydrogen, what's the thing when you think of hydrogen, perhaps not with your power background, but when you think of hydrogen, the first thing a lot of people think of is the Hindenburg. And that's not great PR. And so just getting people more up to speed with what hydrogen can be used for the safety of hydrogen, that can be a challenge specific to electrolytic projects. I think that's the one that comes to mind.
Yeah, and then from my perspective, boiling it down or distilling it down to our project specifically, it's the same challenges that everybody in this room probably has in some form or fashion, getting equipment timely, getting workers to build the thing, customers, as you just heard, or all of those things, getting all of those things queued up and timely will absolutely affect the execution of all of these projects. Electrolyzers specifically, because there's a lot of demand for them right now. Those are long lead enterprises. So that's going to be the challenge for everybody who wants to do it if you want to use electrolysis as the methodology.
Mm-hmm. So where do you see hydrogen going in the next few decades?
I think it's really exciting because it has the potential to be used for almost anything. One of the commitments NextEra has made is to achieve real zero by 2045. So that's not net zero, that's not offset with RECs, but actually producing no carbon from any of the generation. And as part of that plan, FPL, our regulated side, is planning to sub out the 16,000 megawatts of natural gas generation that they have with hydrogen. And that's part of what Okeechobee is for, to start learning about what that looks like. How do we blend hydrogen with natural gas, and how do we make the transition fully to hydrogen? And I think you can see it using e-fuels or hydrogen fuel cells. Right now, the cost of running a semi on hydrogen using a fuel cell is less expensive than running it with diesel. Now, those trucks are more expensive, so your total cost of ownership isn't quite at parity yet, but as the technology advances, those economics are going to reach parity even with that cost. So I think it has really, and the reason I think people are excited is it has the potential to decarbonize a lot of the hard to decarbonize industries: steelmaking, cement, aviation, marine transportation, really anything. I shouldn't say anything. Don't quote me.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think the potential is massive because of the density and the fact that it's so lightweight. When you compare it to battery and a variety of applications, I just think it's a better solution. The challenge is going to be scaling the infrastructure if you want to deploy it through all of those various means, so that way you can distribute it. So for right now, it's going to be geographic specific and usage specific. Nebraska's in a good spot because of the demand for fertilizer exists today. We don't have to create that demand, and the infrastructure for deploying fertilizer is here today. So we don't have to create that. But putting it into over-the-road trucks and trains and planes and all of those other, even power, all of those other applications is just going to take some time to scale.
So we've gone over a lot about what hydrogen is and where we see it going in the future. But since we're at a Nebraska-specific event, how does hydrogen in Nebraska fit together in all of this?
Yeah, from my standpoint, I got a little ahead of myself, I guess, and sort of answered that. I think you've got a demand market here already for one use of hydrogen. As that continues to evolve, other usages will manifest and continue to grow along with it. Touched on, all of the various e-fuels that will be possible utilizing hydrogen as an input. So I think that's coming here in Nebraska. But first things first, in our view of the world, will be fertilizer and then growing it from there.
I think it has the potential to really employ the strengths of Nebraska in terms of power generation. Nebraska has one of the best capacity factors for wind and really great solar. And when you're looking at an electrolyzer, you really want that complementary wind and solar. So it has the ability to increase the demand for those Nebraskan electrons to turn into molecules and open up the market for what those electrons can be used for coming out of Nebraska.
Probably add to what I was just saying before about our process and electrolysis for the production of hydrogen. Nebraska also benefits greatly from the fact that there's rateable, reliable, and relatively inexpensive power. I think as you compare that to other markets around the country, certainly California and those types of places, you just don't have those same types of opportunities. So Nebraska, for our business, presents a perfect geographic location.
Thank you. So we're going to open it up to questions. So he was talking about generation that's not interconnected to the SPP system.
From my perspective, I think there certainly could be. It kind of depends on how much you need, what the challenges are around getting that much production into the geography of the facility. Again, I think for smaller projects, it absolutely positively would make sense, but for bigger ones, you need it to be ratable, and so it probably needs to be concentrated on the grid.
And I'll add that, running an electrolyzer, depending on the technology, you can ramp it, you can turn it off. It can be flexible, especially the newer technologies. When you talk about taking that hydrogen and even just compressing it, liquefying it, turning it into ammonia, those technologies are much less flexible. So there's a benefit to being connected to the grid when you're transforming hydrogen into a derivative fuel, because those processes are used to and designed to run around the clock. As opposed to the way the electrolyzers are evolving to be a little bit more flexible to be connected to renewable energy.
So this is maybe looking down the road a little bit, because Josh and Grace both talked about using hydrogen where it's at location-wise, but transporting hydrogen is hard to reference that. Where do you see that? If you could look into a crystal ball, what's the likely things? Because we have this opportunity, but we won't be able to use it all, although ag, I think, can use it all. Help me understand a little bit about the transportation.
I think transportation is probably going to be one of those things, in addition to deploying it through fuel cells or whatever, that's going to be very problematic for scaling it. To liquefy hydrogen today is an expensive proposition. Transporting it in its gas form, because it's so diffusive, is also very, very difficult. It happens in small volumes at high compression rates, so that's pretty inefficient. I personally think ammonia is what will be used to transport hydrogen as we look out into the future. But again, that I think that's a problem that they'll have to solve in the coming years, as the ability to deploy it into usage or specific applications continues to evolve.
I'll add that if I had a crystal ball and I was looking 25, maybe 30 years in the future, I would assume that we're going to have a hydrogen pipeline network. And that's one of the things that's most exciting to me about the hydrogen hub funding, and at the way they've geographically spread it across the country, is hopefully it will start to interconnect those different hubs with pipeline networks, which brings down the cost, obviously, of the hydrogen transport, and we can transport it as hydrogen as opposed to converting it into something like ammonia and then potentially having to crack it back into hydrogen. And then we can use ammonia, especially if we have a pipeline network, for things like longer duration storage, some things that batteries can't quite get to yet. And so that would, to me, is the ultimate goal, really, to have is a hydrogen pipeline network similar to the natural gas pipeline network.
So in curiosity, to follow up on that last point, do you think that we can repurpose the natural gas pipeline infrastructure to carry hydrogen, at least in part, through this theoretical hydrogen hub pipeline network, or are we going to have to build all that infrastructure from scratch? Because I think it would be maybe either an impediment or perhaps a boon towards the deployment of such a network if we could repurpose some of the existing infrastructure.
Certainly a boon if you are a pipeline company. The thing about hydrogen right now is it's seen as a contaminant in the natural gas pipeline network. You can't have levels of hydrogen above a certain percentage. It causes embrittlement in a lot of the existing pipelines. So there are technologies being deployed today, I think tested, where you can have a liner into an existing pipeline, or you can obviously construct a new pipeline, hydrogen being the smallest molecule. There's increased leakage. So there's a lot of problems or opportunities in terms of solving, blending or converting an existing pipeline network into hydrogen from natural gas, that I think this is the perfect thing for that hub funding to go to, is really solving some of the more technological challenges that maybe a single company or a single project couldn't take on.
I'm just curious, what are the water requirements of a hydrogen production facility? Maybe also from a consumptive and maybe any other uses.
For my facility specifically, the hydrogen production portion of the process will use roughly the equivalent of a center pivot irrigation system on a section 360 acres. if it were to run year round, of course, because our production process would operate year round. Might add to that, that's 200 megawatts of power producing 90 tons of hydrogen a day. So, I mean, if you wanted to make more or less, you could scale that in either direction for an approximation.
Okay. If there's no more questions, thank you so much to the panelists.